When the Zephyrian Collective realized their mistake, it was already too late. They had sent the distress signal across 47 star systems, desperately seeking help against the unstoppable void swarm that devoured entire civilizations. Every advanced species in the galaxy had either fallen silent or explicitly refused to help. The mathematical probability of survival had dropped to 0.003%. That's when someone suggested the unthinkable. What about the humans? The silence in the emergency council chamber was deafening. Humans, the species everyone whispered about in fearful tones. The ones who had somehow survived on a death world where everything tried to kill them. The species that had never lost a war, even when vastly outnumbered. The ones whose very existence violated every principle of logical evolution. But they were also the species that every galactic power had agreed should never, under any circumstances, be contacted for military assistance. Some rules, however, are made to be broken when extinction is the only alternative. The distress beacon was already transmitting toward the Sol system before anyone could change their minds. In 72 hours, they would discover why humans were considered the most dangerous species in the galaxy, and why that might be exactly what they needed. The emergency session of the Zephyrian High Council had been running for 18 hours straight, and Ambassador Kethera could feel the weight of despair settling over the chamber like a suffocating blanket. The holographic display at the center of the room showed their worst nightmare in stark, clinical detail. A three-dimensional map of the Outer Rim territories, with system after system marked in the crimson glow that indicated total annihilation. The Void Swarm was advancing faster than their most pessimistic projections had predicted. Sector 7 Alpha has gone silent, reported Admiral Zexhai, her forearms trembling as she manipulated the controls. That's the Carillion homeworld and 3 major industrial systems. Complete communication blackout as of 6 hours ago. Kethera's tail lashed in agitation, a nervous habit she developed during her centuries of diplomatic service. She had negotiated treaties between species that had been at war for millennia, had brokered peace during the Great Metal Wars, had even managed to establish trade relations with the notoriously xenophobic crystalline entities. But nothing in her extensive experience had prepared her for this. The Void Swarm defied everything they knew about spacefaring civilizations. It wasn't a species in any recognizable sense. It was something far worse. A collective intelligence that consumed entire worlds, breaking down matter at the molecular level and incorporating it into an ever-growing fleet of biomechanical horrors. They didn't negotiate, didn't communicate, didn't show mercy. They simply devoured everything in their path and moved on to the next target. What's the status of our request for assistance from the Andromedan Federation? Kethera asked, though she already knew the answer from Admiral Zexhai's expression. They've withdrawn their entire fleet beyond the galactic barrier, came the expected response. Their exact words were that they cannot risk contamination of their territories for the sake of a doomed galaxy. A bitter laugh escaped from Counselor Vithran, his crystalline features reflecting the red warning lights that had been flashing for days. At least they were honest about it. The Centauri Alliance just stopped responding to our messages entirely. The list of rejections was growing longer by the hour. The hegemony of 7 suns had offered their thoughts and prayers, but no actual military support. The Trade Federation had expressed their deep concern while simultaneously implementing new shipping routes that avoided the entire threatened region. Even the Peacekeeping Coalition, whose charter explicitly required them to respond to extinction-level threats, had found bureaucratic reasons to delay their response indefinitely. 47 civilizations contacted, 0 commitments to help. There has to be someone, Kethera said, her voice carrying a desperation that she tried to hide. We've only explored 60% of the galaxy. There must be some species we haven't contacted yet, some civilization powerful enough to make a difference. The chamber fell silent except for the constant hum of the massive processors calculating tactical scenarios, each one ending in the same inevitable conclusion: total defeat within 36 standard days. That's when junior analyst Pip Talk raised one of his many tentacles in a gesture that requested permission to speak. As the youngest member of the council, barely past his first molting, he rarely contributed to the discussions. Most of the senior members had forgotten he was even present. "What is it, analyst?" Admiral Zexhai asked, her tone suggesting she had little patience for interruptions. Pip Talk's color shifted to a nervous blue-green as all eyes turned toward him. "Well, Honored Council, I've been reviewing our xenological databases, cross-referencing species by military capability and combat effectiveness. There is one species we haven't contacted." "Impossible," Counselor Vithran interjected. "We've sent requests to every known military power in the galaxy." "Not every species, Honored Counselor," Pip Talk said, his voice growing smaller. "We haven't contacted the humans." The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop by several degrees. Kethera felt her blood chill in a way that had nothing to do with the environmental controls. Even mentioning humans in a military context was considered taboo among most civilized species. Admiral Zexhai's forearms crossed defensively. We don't contact humans for military assistance. Ever. There are protocols, agreements, understanding among all civilized species." "But why?" Pip Talk asked with the innocent curiosity that only came with youth. "Their combat effectiveness ratings are exceptional. They've never lost a defensive war. Their adaptation capabilities are unprecedented. By every metric in our databases, they should be our first choice for military assistance, not our last resort." The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken by the soft chime of another incoming report. Admiral Zexhai's expression grew even grimmer as she reviewed the data. "The hegemony of 7 suns has fallen," she announced quietly. "Complete system sterilization. The swarm has absorbed their entire fleet and is now 40% larger than our previous estimates." The weight of that statement settled over the council like a death shroud. The hegemony had possessed one of the most advanced military forces in the galaxy, with weapons technology that could crack planets and defensive shields that had never been breached. If they had fallen so completely that not even a distress signal had escaped, what hope did anyone have? "Tell me about the humans," Kethera said suddenly, surprising herself with the words. "Not the rumors, not the whispered stories. What do our actual files say about them?" Pip Talk's color brightened slightly as he accessed his research. "They originate from a Class 12 death world designated Sol 3, commonly called Earth. The planet's surface is 71% covered in a liquid that's toxic to most known species. The atmosphere contains a highly reactive gas that causes rapid oxidation. The gravity is nearly twice the galactic standard. The temperature variations are extreme. The radiation from their star should have sterilized the surface millions of years ago. And they evolved there naturally?" Counselor Vithran asked, his tone suggesting disbelief. "Not just evolved, Honored Counselor. They thrived. Their species has survived multiple extinction events, including asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, ice ages, and plagues that eliminated 90% of other species on their world. They developed tool use, agriculture, and civilization despite having no natural weapons, no armor plating, no venom, and no significant size advantage over their predators." Admiral Zexhai leaned forward, her military mind beginning to grasp the implications. "What about their technology level?" "They achieved faster-than-light travel in less than 300 years after developing powered flight. Their first contact with galactic civilization occurred only 75 years ago, but they've already established colonies in over 200 systems. Their technological advancement rate is approximately 30 times faster than the galactic average." "And their military capabilities?" Kethera asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know. Pip Talk's color shifted to an excited orange. "This is where it becomes truly remarkable, Honored Ambassador. Humans have been involved in 43 documented conflicts since achieving spaceflight. Their win-loss record is 43 wins, 0 losses. In every case where they were significantly outnumbered or outgunned, they somehow found a way to emerge victorious. How is that possible? Midan zethai demandet. The mathematics alone should make such a record impossible. That's just it, honored Admiral. Human military doctrine doesn't follow standard mathematical models. They use something they call asymmetric warfare combined with an approach they term thinking outside the box. Their strategies consistently violate accepted tactical principles, yet they achieve victory through methods that our war colleges would classify as impossible. The young analyst paused, his color shifting to a deeper, more thoughtful hue. There's something else. In every conflict they've been involved in, humans have demonstrated a capability that no other species possesses to the same degree, which is quedar pronta. They don't surrender, ever. Even when facing complete annihilation, even when the logical choice is to negotiate for better terms, even when continuing to fight serves no rational purpose, humans keep fighting. Their casualty reports contain a phrase that appears repeatedly: death before dishonor. Our xenopsychologists believe this represents a fundamental difference in their neural architecture compared to other species. The chamber fell silent again, but this time the quality of the silence was different. Instead of despair, there was a growing sense of possibility. What else? Admiral Zexhai asked quietly. Pip Talk brought up a new display, showing comparative statistics that made the entire council gasp. Humans possess the highest individual combat effectiveness rating of any known species. A single human soldier, properly equipped, has a statistical combat value equivalent to 12.7 Zephyrian warriors, 8.3 Andromedan shock troopers, or 15.2 crystalline combat forms. That's impossible, Counselor Vithran protested. Those numbers would suggest that a human military force would be exponentially more effective than anything we've encountered, Kethera finished quietly. But if they're so powerful, why do all the other species warn against contacting them? Pip Talk's color shifted to a nervous purple. According to the restricted files, it's because of something called the human doctrine. When humans commit to a military action, they don't limit themselves to proportional responses. They escalate until they achieve what they call total victory, regardless of cost or consequences. The galactic powers established an informal agreement to never request human military assistance because once humans become involved in a conflict, the conflict ends in one of two ways: complete victory for the humans and their allies, or what? Or total annihilation of everything involved, including the humans themselves. They have a saying, if we're going down, we're taking everyone with us. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Humans didn't just fight to win. They fought with a level of commitment that bordered on insanity by galactic standards. Kethera looked around the chamber at her colleagues, seeing her own thoughts reflected in their expressions. They were facing a choice between certain extinction and possibly inviting something even worse into their galaxy. Show me their contact protocols, she said finally. Honored Ambassador, Admiral Zexhai said carefully, are you certain this is wise? Once we send that signal, we can't take it back. If the rumors are true, if humans are as dangerous as the other species claim, then maybe dangerous is exactly what we need, Kethera replied. The Void Swarm has destroyed everything else we've thrown at it. Conventional tactics, superior technology, overwhelming numbers. Nothing has worked. Maybe it's time to try something unconventional. She stood, her formal robes rustling with the movement. How long would it take for a message to reach the Sol system? 72 hours using quantum entanglement transmission. Pip Talk answered immediately. And how long before the swarm reaches our core worlds? Admiral Zexhai consulted her tactical display. At current advancement rates, 34 days. Ketara nudda grimly. The mathematics were simple enough. They had perhaps 31 days after the humans received their message to mount some kind of defense. 31 days to either save their civilization or watch it burn alongside whatever the humans brought with them. Prepare the transmission, she ordered. Include everything, our tactical situation, enemy capabilities, estimated timeline for total system collapse. Make it clear that we're not asking for limited assistance or advisory support. We're asking for whatever they're willing to commit to what may be the final battle for this galaxy. As Pip Talk began encoding the message, Counselor Vithran approached Kethera with a concerned expression. You realize what this means, don't you? If we're wrong about the humans, if they turn out to be as dangerous as the warning suggests, we could be trading one extinction event for another. Kethera watched the transmission parameters loading on the display, knowing that in a few moments, they would cross a line that could never be uncrossed. Maybe, but at least it would be a choice. The Void Swarm offers no choices, no negotiations, no possibility of survival. Whatever the humans bring, at least there's a chance we can find some way to work with them. The transmission array hummed to life, quantum entangled particles carrying their desperate plea across the vast emptiness of space toward a small blue world that most of the galaxy preferred to forget existed. Message transmitted, Pip Talk reported. Estimated delivery time, 72 hours, 14 minutes. Now all they could do was wait, and hope that they hadn't just invited something worse than the Void Swarm into their galaxy. In 72 hours, they would discover what it really meant to ask the most dangerous species in the galaxy for help. The countdown to humanity's arrival had begun. Admiral Sarah Chun had been enjoying her first day off in 3 months when the quantum entanglement communicator in her personal quarters began emitting the distinctive tone that meant priority message from outside the Sol system. She sighed, setting down her coffee and the historical novel she'd been reading about the ancient Earth conflicts known as the World Wars. Even during supposed downtime, the universe had a way of demanding attention. The message header made her sit up straighter in her chair. Origin point, Zephyrian space, approximately 40,000 light-years from Earth. Priority level, extinction event. Classification, military assistance request. Aria, who else has received this transmission? She asked the ship's artificial intelligence. Admiral, you're the first human to receive this message. However, protocols require me to simultaneously notify Fleet Command, the Office of Xenological Affairs, and the Emergency Response Council. Sarah nodded as she opened the full message, her expression growing more serious with each line. The Zephyrians were known throughout human space as one of the more reasonable alien civilizations, diplomatic, logical, generally peaceful. If they were sending an extinction-level distress call, the situation was genuinely dire. The tactical data painted a grim picture. The Void Swarm, as the Zephyrians called it, had already consumed 17 major star systems and showed no signs of slowing down. The attached sensor readings described something that violated several fundamental laws of physics as humans understood them. A collective entity that could somehow break down matter at the molecular level and incorporate it into biological starships that defied conventional understanding of engineering. What really caught Sarah's attention, however, was the list of species that had already refused to help. The Andromedan Federation, the Trade Alliance, the hegemony of 7 suns, civilizations with military capabilities that exceeded humanity's by orders of magnitude. If they had all decided the situation was hopeless, then the Zephyrians were quite literally facing extinction. Her personal communicator chimed with an incoming priority transmission. The face of Admiral Marcus Rodriguez, head of the Terra Defense Force, appeared on screen. His expression was grim. Sarah, tell me you've seen the Zephyrian transmission. Just finish reviewing it, sir. How bad is our intel on this Void Swarm situation? Marcus's expression darkened further. Bad enough that I've called an emergency session of the Defense Council. We need you here within 6 hours. And, Sarah, this isn't just about the Zephyrians anymore. Our long-range sensors have detected gravitational anomalies consistent with the swarm signature moving toward the galactic core. At current trajectory, they'll reach the outer edges of human space in approximately 2 years. Sarah felt her blood run cold. 2 years sounded like a long time, but in military terms, it was barely enough time to tie their shoes, let alone mount an effective defense against something that had crushed civilizations far more advanced than humanity. Understood, sir. I'll depart for Earth within the hour. The trip back to Earth gave Sarah time to review everything humanity knew about the Zephyrians and their neighbors. The picture that emerged was troubling in ways that went far beyond the immediate threat of the Void Swarm. Humanity had been spacefaring for less than a century, which made them infants by galactic standards. Most alien civilizations had thousands or tens of thousands of years of experience with interstellar warfare, advanced technology, and complex strategic thinking. The fact that they had all concluded the situation was hopeless suggested that conventional approaches to the problem had already been tried and found wanting. But humans, Sarah reflected, had never been particularly fond of conventional approaches. The Emergency Defense Council meeting was held in the secure chambers beneath the Luna Military Command Center, a facility that had been carved out of the moon's bedrock specifically for situations like this. The assembled representatives included not just military leadership, but also scientists, diplomats, and strategic planners from across human space. Let's start with what we know. Admiral Rodriguez began, activating the holographic display at the center of the room. Dr. Yamamoto, your assessment of the enemy capabilities? Dr. Keiko Yamamoto, head of the Xenological Threat Analysis Division, stood and manipulated the controls to show the Zephyrian sensor data. Based on the information provided, we're looking at an entity that operates on principles we don't fully understand. They appear to be capable of converting any form of matter into biomechanical constructs that function as both weapons and ships. Their individual units show adaptation capabilities that suggest some form of distributed intelligence. Weaknesses? Asked General Patricia Morrison from the Army Strategic Command. Unknown. The Zephyrian data shows they've tried everything from antimatter weapons to quantum disruptors to biological warfare. Nothing has been effective. In fact, the swarm appears to adapt to each new attack method and incorporate it into their own capabilities. Sarah leaned forward. What about their expansion pattern? Is there any logic to their target selection? Dr. Yamamoto brought up a galactic map showing the swarm's progression. They appear to prioritize systems with high industrial capacity and large populations. They're not just consuming worlds randomly. They're systematically eliminating the most valuable strategic targets first. Smart, observed Admiral Chun. They're not just feeding, they're conducting strategic warfare. That suggests intelligence and planning capability. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They weren't dealing with a mindless force of nature, but with an intelligent enemy that had already proven capable of outthinking some of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Ambassador Diana Okafor, representing the diplomatic corps, raised her hand. Before we discuss military options, I have to ask the obvious question. Why us? The Zephyrians have had minimal contact with humanity. Why would they reach out to us when civilizations with much greater military capability have refused to help? Admiral Rodriguez exchanged glances with Sarah before answering. According to our intelligence analysis, it's precisely because we're less advanced that they contacted us. The major galactic powers have calculated that the cost of fighting the swarm exceeds the benefit of victory. They're cutting their losses and retreating to defend their core territories. But we don't have core territories to retreat to, Sarah realized aloud. If this thing reaches human space, we have nowhere to run. Exactly. The Zephyrians are gambling that a species with nothing to lose might be willing to try approaches that more established civilizations consider too risky. General Morrison frowned. What kind of approaches? Dr. Yamamoto highlighted several sections of the tactical analysis. Based on human military history, we have a tendency toward what our xenological allies call disproportionate escalation. We don't limit ourselves to matching enemy force levels. We exceed them whenever possible. You're talking about the nuclear doctrine, Ambassador Okafor said with understanding dawning in her voice. Among other things, Admiral Rodriguez confirmed. Humans have a track record of being willing to pay costs that other species consider unacceptable in order to achieve total victory. The question before this council is whether we're willing to apply that same mindset to this situation. Sarah stood and walked to the holographic display, studying the progression of the Void Swarm's advance. What do we know about their reproduction or creation process? How do they make more of themselves? They appear to consume matter and energy from destroyed civilizations and convert it directly into new units, Dr. Yamamoto explained. Each world they destroy makes them larger and more capable. So their strength is also their weakness, Sarah mused. They need to consume to grow, which means they have to expose themselves to attack during the consumption process. General Morrison caught the implication immediately. You're thinking about denial tactics. I'm thinking about something more extreme than denial tactics, Sarah replied. If they need to consume matter to grow stronger, what happens if we deny them that matter in a way that also damages them directly? The room fell silent as the assembled leaders contemplated what she was suggesting. You're talking about scorched earth tactics on a galactic scale, Admiral Rodriguez said quietly. I'm talking about turning every world they want to consume into a weapon against them, Sarah clarified. Humans have extensive experience with defensive strategies that involve making territory too costly for the enemy to hold. Dr. Yamamoto brought up historical data on human conflicts. During the Second World War, the Soviet Union implemented a policy of total destruction when forced to retreat from advancing German forces. Infrastructure, crops, fuel supplies, anything that could be useful to the enemy was destroyed rather than captured. But we're not talking about retreating, General Morrison pointed out. We're talking about advancing into their territory. Sarah nodded. We're talking about something that's never been tried before because no other species has been crazy enough to attempt it. We're talking about turning their own food source into poison. Ambassador Okafor looked troubled. The ethical implications of what you're suggesting. The ethical implications of allowing the Void Swarm to consume the entire galaxy are worse, Sarah interrupted. Sometimes the only way to save civilization is to be willing to sacrifice parts of it. Admiral Rodriguez called for a brief recess to allow the council members to process what they were discussing. Sarah found herself standing alone on the observation deck, looking out at the Earth hanging in the black sky above. Humanity's homeworld looked so peaceful from this distance, so fragile and blue and perfect. In 2 years, if they did nothing, the Void Swarm would reach human space. In 2 years, that beautiful blue world would become just another meal for an insatiable cosmic horror. But if they acted, if they implemented the kind of strategy Sarah was beginning to envision, they would be committing humanity to a course of action that would change them forever. Win or lose, they would never again be the same species that had once looked up at the stars with wonder and hope. The council reconvened with a sense of grim determination that hadn't been present before. Dr. Chen, Admiral Rodriguez began, I want you to lay out exactly what you're proposing. Sarah took a deep breath before beginning. Based on the tactical data, the Void Swarm requires approximately 72 standard hours to completely consume a planetary system. During that time, they're vulnerable because they're dispersed and focused on the consumption process rather than combat operations. She manipulated the holographic display to show her tactical concept. We use that window to implement what I'm calling the Purist Protocol. Every world in the projected path of the swarm gets seeded with quantum destabilization devices. When the swarm arrives and begins consumption, the devices activate and convert the entire planetary mass into a quantum cascade reaction. The silence that followed was profound. You're talking about turning entire worlds into bombs, General Morrison said finally. I'm talking about making it so expensive for the swarm to feed that they either starve or exhaust themselves trying to process poison meals, Sarah replied. Every world they try to consume becomes a weapon that damages their fleet and reduces their capabilities. Dr. Yamamoto was rapidly calculating on her tablet. The energy requirements alone would be staggering. We need to evacuate entire star systems and sacrifice them completely. The Zephyrians are already losing those systems, Sarah pointed out. At least this way, those losses serve a strategic purpose. Ambassador Okafor looked pale. The number of refugees, the logistics of evacuation, the resources required, all manageable if we start immediately and if we have the full cooperation of every remaining free civilization in the galaxy, Admiral Rodriguez said with growing conviction. The question is whether we can convince the Zephyrians and their allies to accept a plan this extreme. Sarah nodded. It won't be an easy sell. We're essentially asking them to help us turn their own territory into a minefield. But given the alternative is extinction for everyone, General Morrison finished. At least this way, there's a chance that something survives. The vote was unanimous, though Sarah could see the weight of the decision in every face around the table. They were committing humanity to a war unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, using weapons and tactics that no other species had been willing to consider. Admiral Rodriguez stood formally. Motion approved. Admiral Chun, you'll command the expedition to Zephyrian space. General Morrison, begin immediate mobilization of our engineering corps and evacuation specialist units. Dr. Yamamoto, I want technical specification for the quantum destabilization devices within 48 hours. Ambassador Okafor, prepare the diplomatic groundwork for what we're about to propose. As the council members dispersed to begin their preparations, Sarah remained behind, still staring at the tactical display showing the swarm's relentless advance. In 72 hours, they would arrive in Zephyrian space with a proposal that would either save the galaxy or ensure that humanity's first major intervention in galactic affairs would also be its last. Either way, the universe was about to discover why other species considered humans the most dangerous civilization they'd ever encountered. The real war was about to begin. The human fleet materialized at the edge of Zephyrian space exactly 72 hours after receiving the distress call, arriving with a precision that impressed even the mathematically minded Zephyrians. What truly shocked them, however, was the size and composition of the response force. Ambassador Kythera watched from the bridge of the Zephyrian command ship as 47 human vessels dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. These weren't the sleek, elegant ships favored by most galactic civilizations. Human ships looked like what they were, instruments of war designed by a species that understood that function mattered more than form. By the ancient rings, Admiral Zexhai whispered, her four arms trembling slightly as she studied the tactical display. They brought their entire deep space fleet. Not their entire fleet, corrected junior analyst Pip Talk, his color shifting to an odd purple. According to the sensor readings, this represents approximately 60% of their total naval capacity. They're holding the rest in reserve to defend their home systems. Kythera felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental controls. The humans had committed the majority of their military forces to help a species they barely knew, based on a single distress call. Either they were the most generous species in the galaxy, or they understood something about the threat that the other civilizations had missed. The communication panel chimed with an incoming transmission request. The image that appeared on the main screen showed a human female wearing what appeared to be a military uniform. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical style, and her eyes held an intensity that made Kythera unconsciously straighten her posture. Zephyrian Command, this is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Terran Defense Force. We receive your distress call and are here to assist. Requesting permission to send a diplomatic shuttle to your flagship for immediate strategic consultation. Admiral Zexhai looked uncertainly at Kythera before responding. Permission granted, Admiral Chun. We have much to discuss. The human shuttle that docked with their ship 20 minutes later was unlike anything the Zephyrians had seen. Where most alien shuttles were designed for comfort and diplomatic impression, the human craft looked like it could function equally well as transportation or as a weapon. Even the docking procedure demonstrated a military precision that spoke of extensive combat experience. Admiral Chun entered the Zephyrian Command Center accompanied by 3 other humans, 2 military officers, and one who appeared to be a scientist or technical specialist. What struck Kethera immediately was how comfortable they seemed in what should have been an alien environment. Most species require time to adjust to foreign atmospheres, gravity, and social dynamics. The humans appear to take it all in stride. Ambassador Kethera, Admiral Chin said, her voice carrying a warmth that somehow made the formal military setting feel less intimidating. Thank you for trusting us with this situation. I know contacting humanity wasn't your first choice. Kethera's tail twitched in embarrassment. Admiral, we had exhausted all other options. The major powers of the galaxy have either fallen to the swarm or abandoned this region entirely. Which gives us an advantage, Admiral Chin replied, surprising everyone in the room. We don't have established protocols or diplomatic constraints limiting our response options. Sometimes fresh perspective is exactly what a crisis needs. She gestured to her companions. This is General Morrison, our ground combat specialist, and Dr. Yamamoto, our expert on xenological threats. They've been analyzing the data you provided during our journey here. Dr. Yamamoto stepped forward, activating a portable display device that projected a 3-dimensional representation of the Void Swarm's advance. Your tactical intelligence is excellent, but we believe there are patterns in the swarm's behavior that previous analyses have missed. Admiral Zexhai leaned forward, her military training overriding her discomfort with the alien presence. What kind of patterns? Temporal patterns, General Morrison answered. The swarm doesn't attack randomly. They follow a precise schedule that suggests they're operating under resource constraints we haven't identified yet. The human display showed the timeline of swarm attacks, overlaid with detailed consumption patterns. Notice the intervals between major assaults. Exactly 127.3 standard hours between each planetary consumption event, with minor variations that correlate to system population density and industrial capacity. Pip-Talk's color shifted to an excited orange. They're not just feeding randomly. They're managing their resources. Exactly, Dr. Yamamoto confirmed, which means they have limitations. They need time to process and integrate each meal before moving on to the next target. During that processing period, they're vulnerable. Admiral Chun manipulated the display to show her proposed tactical response. We're going to exploit that vulnerability using a strategy that no other species has been willing to attempt. What she revealed next caused stunned silence in the Zephyrian Command Center. You want to turn our own worlds into weapons? Admiral Zexhai asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We want to turn the swarm's food source against them, General Morrison clarified. Every world they try to consume becomes a quantum destabilization bomb that damages their fleet and reduces their capability to process future targets. Kethera felt her diplomatic training struggling to find appropriate words. The cost, the destruction, will be total regardless of what we do, Admiral Chun said gently, but firmly. The swarm is going to destroy those worlds anyway. At least this way, we ensure that every world they take costs them dearly. She activated another section of the display, showing the projected casualties. According to our calculations, if we implement the Purist protocol successfully, we can evacuate approximately 70% of the civilian population from the targeted systems. The other 30% will die. Admiral Zexhai finished grimly. Will die fighting instead of being consumed helplessly, Admiral Chin corrected. And their sacrifice will save billions of lives and systems further from the swarm's advance route. The brutal mathematics of the proposal were undeniable, but the ethical implications were staggering. They were discussing the deliberate sacrifice of entire civilizations in order to poison the enemy's food supply. How many worlds are we talking about? Kethera asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. Dr. Yamamoto highlighted the projected swarm advance path. 43 inhabited systems directly in their path, plus approximately 100 agricultural and industrial worlds that provide strategic value. We need to evacuate and weaponize all of them to make the strategy effective. That's That's millions of people, Pip Talk said, his color shifting to a horrified gray. Billions, General Morrison corrected matter-of-factly. But the alternative is trillions. The swarm won't stop with the Outer Rim territories. Once they finish consuming this region, they'll move toward the galactic core, where the population density is much higher. Admiral Chin stepped closer to the Zephyrian commanders, her expression intense. I need you to understand something about humanity. We don't fight wars to achieve acceptable outcomes. We fight wars to win, completely and decisively, regardless of cost. That's why other species consider us dangerous. She paused, letting that sink in. But it's also why we might be the only species capable of stopping something like the Void Swarm. We're willing to pay prices that others won't pay, take risks that others won't take, and use methods that others won't consider. The command center fell silent, except for the constant hum of the ship's systems. Kethera could see her colleagues struggling with the moral weight of what the humans were proposing. There's something else you need to know, Admiral Chin continued. Our projections show that the swarm will reach human space in approximately 2 years at current expansion rates. We're not just offering to help you. We're proposing a joint defense of our combined territories. Admiral Zexhai's tactical mind immediately grasped the implications. You're offering a mutual defense alliance. We're offering something more than that, General Morrison said. We're offering to share technology, resources, and strategic planning that could transform how this galaxy approaches the concept of warfare. Dr. Yamamoto activated another display showing human technological capabilities. Our quantum destabilization technology is just one application of principles we've developed for what we call asymmetric warfare. We have other capabilities that might prove useful. The list of human military technologies was both impressive and terrifying. Planetary-scale shields, automated defense networks, adaptive artificial intelligences, and weapons systems based on principles that violated several galactic conventions regarding acceptable military conduct. Some of these technologies are banned by galactic law, Admiral Zexhai pointed out. The Void Swarm isn't bound by galactic law, Admiral Chin replied simply. Fighting an enemy that ignores all rules while restricting ourselves to conventional limitations is a guaranteed path to defeat. Kethera realized they had reached the moment of decision. The humans were offering exactly what she had hoped for when they sent the distress signal, a species willing and able to fight the Void Swarm on equal terms. But they were also offering something she hadn't expected, a fundamental change in how civilized species approach the concept of warfare. If we agree to this alliance, she said carefully, what guarantees do we have that humanity won't become a threat to galactic peace once the swarm is defeated? Admiral Chin's expression softened slightly. You don't have any guarantees. That's part of the risk you take when you invite the most dangerous species in the galaxy to help you fight. But I can tell you this. Humanity has never initiated aggressive warfare against a species that honored their agreements with us. She gestured toward the tactical display, showing the swarm's advance. Right now, you have a choice between definite extinction and possible future complications with humanity. I can't make that choice for you, but I can tell you that every hour we spend in discussion is an hour the swarm uses to grow stronger. As if summoned by her words, an urgent alarm began sounding throughout the Zephyrian ship. Admiral Zexhai rushed to her command station, her expression growing grim as she reviewed the incoming data. The swarm has finished consuming the hegemony systems, she announced. They're now moving toward the Carillion sector. At current advancement rates, they'll reach our outer defense perimeter in 18 days. The timeline had just accelerated dramatically. 18 days to evacuate 43 star systems and implement a defensive strategy that had never been tested against an enemy they didn't fully understand. Admiral Chun turned to face the assembled Zephyrian commanders. We need an answer now. Are you willing to fight this war the human way? Or do you want to continue trying conventional approaches until there's nothing left to save? Kethera looked around the command center, seeing her own thoughts reflected in every face present. They had asked the humans for help, but they hadn't truly understood what human help would entail. "What do you need from us?" she asked finally. Admiral Chen's smile was both reassuring and terrifying. "Everything you've got, and some things you didn't know you had. We're about to teach the Void Swarm why humanity is considered the most dangerous species in the galaxy. And if we lose, then we make sure the cost of victory is so high that whatever's left of the swarm won't have the strength to threaten anyone else." General Morrison answered with a casual tone of someone discussing weather patterns. Kethera realized that in asking for humanity's help, they hadn't just gained powerful allies. They had fundamentally altered the nature of the conflict itself. The question now wasn't whether they could defeat the Void Swarm. The question was whether anything would be left of the galaxy when the fighting finally ended. "Admiral Chun," she said formally, "the Zephyrian Collective accepts your alliance and agrees to implement the Purist Protocol." "Excellent," Admiral Chun replied. "In that case, let's begin turning this galaxy into the most expensive meal the Void Swarm has ever tried to eat." The real war was about to begin, and it would be fought using rules that no previous galactic conflict had ever contemplated. The evacuation of the Carillion system had begun at dawn, 17 days after the Human-Zephyrian Alliance was formed. Admiral Sarah Chun stood in the command center of the hastily constructed orbital platform, watching as millions of refugees streamed toward the transport ships in an organized chaos that somehow maintained perfect efficiency despite its apparent disorder. "Evacuation progress report," she called out to the mixed Human-Zephyrian staff that had become the operational heart of their joint defense effort. 87% of civilians evacuated from inhabited worlds, reported Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, her human aide-de-camp. Industrial equipment removal at 63%, strategic resource extraction at 91%. Admiral Zexhai approached from her station coordinating the Zephyrian evacuation fleets. Her 4 arms moved in constant motion as she managed multiple data streams simultaneously. "Admiral Chun, we have a problem. The outer sensor arrays are detecting gravitational anomalies consistent with Swarm Advanced Scouts. They're arriving 14 hours ahead of schedule." Sarah felt her blood chill. 14 hours wasn't enough time to complete the evacuation, let alone finish installing the quantum destabilization devices that would turn Corellia Prime into a massive bomb. "Options?" she asked tersely. Dr. Yamamoto looked up from her technical console, her expression grim. "We can accelerate the QD installation process, but it means reducing the evacuation window to 6 hours. Or we can complete the evacuation and abandon the Purist Protocol for this system." "Third option," Sarah pressed. "We fight them here, now, with incomplete preparations," General Morrison said from his position coordinating the military aspects of the operation. "Use this system as a testing ground for direct combat with swarm forces." The command center fell silent, except for the constant chatter of evacuation coordinators and refugee processing teams. Sarah stared at the tactical display, showing the approaching swarm scouts, her mind running through scenarios at light speed. "How many civilians still planetside?" she asked. "Approximately 200,000, mostly in remote settlements and underground installations," Admiral Zexhai replied. "QD device installation status?" Dr. Yamamoto checked her readings. 78% complete. "We could achieve minimal effectiveness with current coverage, but optimal results require another 8 hours of work." Sarah nodded slowly, her decision crystallizing. "New plan. We're going to do something that violates every principle of sensible military strategy." She activated the general communication channel, addressing the entire combined fleet. "All vessels, this is Admiral Chun. We have swarm scouts incoming in approximately 6 hours. We're going to use this as an opportunity to test our combat capabilities against real enemy forces while simultaneously completing both evacuation and QD installation." The response was immediate and predictably concerned. "Admiral," came the voice of Captain Williams from the human destroyer TDF Relentless, "are you suggesting we engage the swarm while civilians are still planetside?" I'm suggesting we use their arrival to our advantage, Sarah replied. The swarm scouts will expect us to either flee or mount a conventional defensive action. They won't expect us to treat their arrival as a field training exercise. Admiral Zexai's color shifted to a nervous blue-green. Admiral Chun, with respect, this approach seems extremely risky. Everything we're doing is extremely risky, Sarah pointed out. The difference is whether we take calculated risks to achieve multiple objectives simultaneously or whether we allow the enemy to dictate the terms of engagement. She manipulated the tactical display to show her proposed deployment. Human ships will engage the swarm scouts using harassment tactics designed to slow their advance without committing to decisive battle. Zephyrian vessels will continue evacuation operations under combat conditions. Engineering teams will complete QD installation while the fighting provides cover for their activities. General Morrison was studying the plan with the expression of someone recognizing familiar concepts. You're talking about using combat as a diversion for non-combat objectives. I'm talking about turning a crisis into an opportunity, Sarah confirmed. The swarm scouts are here to assess our defensive capabilities and report back to the main force. Let's give them something interesting to report. The next few hours passed in controlled chaos as the combined fleet repositioned according to Sarah's plan. Human ships moved to intercept positions along the projected swarm approach vector, while Zephyrian vessels continued their evacuation runs with increased urgency. Engineering teams worked frantically to complete the quantum destabilization installations while combat units prepared for humanity's first direct engagement with the Void Swarm. The enemy arrived exactly when the sensors had predicted, dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system in a formation that defied conventional understanding of space combat tactics. The swarm scouts weren't ships in any recognizable sense. They were organic constructs the size of battle cruisers, with hull configurations that seemed to shift and adapt even as the human sensors tracked them. "Contact," reported the sensor operator, his voice tight with controlled excitement. 12 large contacts, bioorganic composition, approach vector consistent with reconnaissance pattern. Sarah studied the enemy formation, noting details that hadn't been clear from the Zephyrian sensor logs. The swarm scouts moved with a fluid coordination that suggested either centralized control or a level of communication that human technology couldn't detect. All human vessels. This is Admiral Chun. Initiate harassment protocol. Objectives are intelligence gathering, delay tactics, and capability assessment. Do not engage in decisive combat. We want them curious, not committed to total engagement. The first exchange of fire was unlike anything human forces had experienced. Human weapons, plasma cannons, particle beams, and kinetic projectiles struck the swarm scouts with devastating effect, tearing through their organic hulls and causing massive structural damage. For a moment, Sarah allowed herself to hope that the enemy wasn't as invincible as the reports had suggested. Then, the damaged swarm scouts began to regenerate. "Admiral," came the shocked voice of Captain Williams, "the enemy contacts are healing. Structural damage is being repaired in real time." Sarah watched in fascination as the swarm scouts literally regrew destroyed sections of their hulls, incorporating the energy from human weapons into their regeneration process. "Yamamoto, are you seeing this?" Recording everything, Dr. Yamamoto confirmed from her station. "Admiral, they're not just healing, they're adapting. Each time we hit them with the same weapon type, the damage effectiveness decreases. Then, we don't use the same weapon type twice," Sarah replied immediately. "All ships rotate weapon systems with each engagement. Keep them guessing." The battle that followed became a deadly dance of adaptation and counter-adaptation. Human ships would attack with one weapon system, observe the results, then switch to different weapons before the enemy could fully adapt. Meanwhile, the swarm scouts demonstrated capabilities that challenged every assumption about space combat. They could alter their trajectory without apparent propulsion systems. They could absorb energy from human weapons and redirect it as return fire. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to be learning from each exchange their tactics becoming more sophisticated with each passing minute. Evacuation status? Sarah called out while watching a swarm scout attempt to ram one of her destroyers. 96% complete, Admiral Zexhai reported. Remaining civilians are in hardened shelters and will be extracted by the final transport wave. Coup d'installation. 92% complete, Dr. Yamamoto answered. We can achieve acceptable effectiveness in another 30 minutes. Sarah nodded, then opened communications to the human fleet. All vessels, begin withdrawal to Phase 2 positions. Let's see how curious we can make our new friends. The human ships began a fighting retreat that was carefully choreographed to appear more desperate than it actually was. Each withdrawal was accompanied by covering fire that seemed just barely adequate to keep the swarm scouts at bay, while secretly the human forces were leading the enemy exactly where they wanted them to go. The swarm scouts took the bait, advancing deeper into the system in pursuit of what appeared to be a fleeing enemy. They had no way of knowing that they were being led into the most comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation in human military history. They're following the projected route, General Morrison reported with satisfaction. Sensors are getting detailed scans of their propulsion systems, communication methods, and tactical coordination patterns. Any weaknesses identified? Sarah asked. Dr. Yamamoto was analyzing the incoming data streams in real time. Several. They rely heavily on direct matter absorption for energy. Their regeneration capabilities require raw materials from external sources. And, most importantly, they seem to have difficulty processing quantum entangled particles. Explain that last part. Every time our quantum torpedoes detonate near them, their regeneration process slows dramatically. They can heal from conventional weapons, but quantum effects seem to interfere with their biological processes. Sarah felt a surge of excitement. How significantly? Regeneration effectiveness drops by 60 to 70% when exposed to quantum field disruption, Dr. Yamamoto confirmed. Admiral, interrupted the communications officer, we're receiving a priority message from the Terran Defense Force. They're requesting immediate tactical report on swarm capabilities. Sarah realized that every minute of this engagement was providing intelligence that could save countless lives in future battles. Transmit all combat data to Earth immediately. Include a note that quantum weapons show exceptional effectiveness against swarm regeneration capabilities. The evacuation of Corellia Prime reached completion just as the swarm scouts began to realize they were being led into a trap. The final transport ships departed the planet's surface carrying the last 200,000 civilians, while the quantum destabilization devices reached full operational status. All civilians evacuated. Admiral Zexhai reported with relief. QD devices armed and ready. Sarah looked at the tactical display, showing 12 swarm scouts, now positioned exactly where the quantum destabilization field would have maximum effect. Dr. Yamamoto, what do you project will happen when those scouts try to consume a planet that's been turned into a quantum bomb? Based on our combat observations, the quantum field should interfere with their absorption process while simultaneously damaging their biological systems. Best case scenario, it destroys them outright. Worst case scenario, it causes enough damage to significantly reduce their capabilities. Either outcome provides valuable intelligence for future engagements, General Morrison added. We're about to conduct the largest scale test of anti-swarm tactics in galactic history. Sarah opened communications to the entire combined fleet. All vessels withdraw to minimum safe distance for quantum detonation. Prepare to observe and record everything that happens when a swarm tries to eat a planet that's been turned into a weapon. As the human and Zephyrian ships retreated to their observation positions, the swarm scouts approached Corellia Prime with the confidence of predators that had never encountered effective resistance. They had no way of knowing that the planet they were preparing to consume had been transformed into the most sophisticated trap in galactic history. Swarm scouts beginning planetary approach, reported the sensor operator. Contact with planetary surface in approximately 15 minutes. Sarah settled into her command chair. knowing that the next 15 minutes would either validate humanity's approach to the swarm threat or force them to completely reconsider their strategy. All stations, prepare for quantum destabilization. This is about to get very interesting. The moment of truth was approaching, and with it, the galaxy's first glimpse of what happened when an unstoppable force met a planet that had been turned into an immovable object. The real test of the Pyrrhus Protocol was about to begin. The moment the first swarm scout touched Corellia Prime's surface, every sensor array in the system registered readings that defied conventional physics. Admiral Sarah Chun watched from the command bridge as the planet's quantum destabilization field activated, turning what should have been a routine planetary consumption into something that would fundamentally alter the course of the galactic war. Quantum field activation confirmed, Dr. Yamamoto reported, her voice tight with excitement and apprehension. The swarm scouts are beginning their standard absorption process, but the quantum interference is causing unexpected reactions. On the main display, Corellia Prime appeared to be dissolving at the molecular level as the swarm scouts extended their organic tendrils deep into the planet's crust. What they didn't know was that each molecule they absorbed had been quantum entangled with unstable particles that would turn their feeding process into a weapon against them. Energy readings are off the scale, reported Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez from the sensor station. The quantum entanglement is creating a feedback loop in the swarm absorption process. Sarah leaned forward, watching as the first visible effects began to manifest. The swarm scouts that had appeared invincible during their earlier engagement were now writhing in what could only be described as agony, their bioorganic hulls beginning to destabilize as the quantum poison matter they were absorbing disrupted their cellular structure. Admiral Zexhai, Sarah called to her Zephyrian counterpart. Are you recording this? Every sensor in our fleet is focused on the target area, Admiral Zexhai confirmed, her forearms moving rapidly as she coordinated data collection efforts. This is the first time any species has successfully weaponized a planet against the Void Swarm. The reaction was escalating beyond anything their models had predicted. Instead of simply disrupting the swarm's absorption process, the quantum entanglement was creating a chain reaction that was spreading from the scouts to the planet itself. Corellia Prime was beginning to collapse, but not in the way they had expected. Dr. Yamamoto, Sarah said urgently, is this still within acceptable parameters? We're in uncharted territory, Dr. Yamamoto replied, her fingers flying over her control console. The quantum cascade is more powerful than our projections suggested, but it's also more effective. The swarm scouts are taking catastrophic damage. As if to prove her point, the largest of the 12 scouts suddenly convulsed and broke apart, its bioorganic components scattering into space like debris from a conventional explosion. But instead of simply dying, the scattered pieces began to broadcast what could only be distress signals on frequencies that human and Zephyrian equipment could barely detect. They're calling for help, General Morrison realized. The scouts are transmitting their status to the main swarm force. Sarah felt a chill of realization, which means the main force is about to learn that their food supply has been poisoned and that their advanced scouts have been destroyed by an unknown weapon. The implications were staggering. The Void Swarm had conquered dozens of civilizations by relying on their invincibility and the psychological impact of inevitable defeat. Now, they were about to discover that their latest targets possessed weapons that could not only resist them, but actively harm them. Admiral, came an urgent transmission from Captain Williams aboard the TDF Relentless. We're detecting massive gravitational anomalies at the edge of the system. Multiple large contacts dropping out of FTL. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized what was happening. They're not waiting for scouts to report back. The main swarm force is coming to investigate personally. The tactical display updated to show the new contacts, and the scale was breathtaking. Where the advanced scouts had been the size of battle cruisers, the main swarm force included bioships larger than space stations, accompanied by swarms of smaller organisms that numbered in the thousands. Fleet composition analysis? Sarah requested, her mind already shifting into combat mode. 17 large ships, estimated mass equivalent to Dreadnought-class vessels, reported the sensor operator. Approximately 4,000 smaller organisms ranging from fighter to frigate equivalent mass. Total estimated biomass. Admiral, this is more than 3 times larger than any swarm force previously encountered. Admiral Zexhi's color had shifted to a pale, frightened shade that Sarah had never seen before. They've never committed this much of their force to a single engagement. What we did to their scouts, it's gotten their attention. Good, Sarah replied with a grim smile. Let's see how much attention we can get. She opened communications to the entire combined fleet. All vessels, this is Admiral Chun. We are about to engage the largest void swarm force ever assembled. Everything we do here will determine not just our survival, but the future of galactic civilization. The response was immediate and heartening. Human voices reported ready status with the casual confidence of a species that had never learned to accept defeat. Zephyrian commanders acknowledged orders with the mathematical precision of a civilization that approached warfare as an engineering problem to be solved. "What are your orders, Admiral?" General Morrison asked. Sarah looked at the tactical display, studying the approaching swarm force with the eye of someone who had spent her entire career preparing for battles that couldn't be won using conventional methods. "We're going to teach them the most important lesson in human military doctrine," she said finally. "When you threaten something we're protecting, the cost of victory becomes irrelevant." The plan she outlined in the following minutes would have been considered insane by any rational military standard. Instead of retreating to defensible positions or attempting to hold strategic choke points, the combined human Zephyrian fleet would advance directly toward the main swarm force, using the quantum cascade from Corellia Prime as a weapon. "You want to drive them into the quantum field?" Dr. Yamamoto asked with dawning understanding. "I want to turn this entire star system into a weapons laboratory," Sarah confirmed. "We're going to test every anti-swarm tactic we can think of while we have the chance." As the human and Zephyrian ships moved to intercept the advancing swarm force, the quantum cascade from Corellia Prime continued to expand, creating an area of space where the laws of physics had been fundamentally altered. The surviving swarm scouts were trapped within this field, their bioorganic systems continuing to deteriorate as they absorbed more quantum poison matter. The first direct engagement between the main swarm force and the combined fleet began at maximum weapons range, with human ships opening fire using the rotational weapon strategy they had developed during the scout engagement. But this time they had additional advantages. "Quantum torpedoes away," reported Captain Williams as the TDF Relentless launched its full payload toward the largest swarm ship. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Where conventional weapons had required multiple hits to achieve significant damage, the quantum torpedoes tore through swarm ships like paper, their quantum fields disrupting the cellular regeneration process that made the enemy seem invincible. "Target 1 is showing massive structural failure," reported the sensor operator with barely contained excitement. "No regeneration detected. It's actually dying." But the swarm was learning and adapting even faster than before. The smaller organisms began dispersing in patterns that minimized their exposure to quantum weapons, while the larger ships started coordinating their attacks in ways that prevented the human ships from maintaining safe firing distances. "They're boxing us in," General Morrison observed, studying the enemy movement patterns. "They want to force close-range engagement where their numbers advantage becomes decisive." Sarah nodded, having expected this development. "Then we give them what they want on our terms." She opened communications to Dr. Yamamoto. "How stable is the quantum cascade field?" "Highly unstable and expanding at an accelerating rate," came the immediate response. "At current expansion rates, it will encompass the entire inner system within 6 hours." "Can we control the expansion?" "Not control, but we can influence it." Additional quantum torpedo detonations within the field would accelerate the expansion significantly. Sarah's smile was predatory. "All ships, new tactical objective." We're going to turn this star system into the largest quantum weapon ever deployed. Every quantum torpedo we fire is going to feed the cascade reaction. The battle that followed redefined the concept of asymmetric warfare. Instead of trying to defeat the swarm force through conventional means, the combined fleet focused on hurting the enemy deeper into the expanding quantum field while feeding the cascade reaction with continuous weapons fire. Human ships darted in and out of the expanding quantum field, using their superior maneuverability to avoid the worst effects while luring swarm organisms deeper into the area where quantum effects were strongest. Zephyrian vessels provided long-range fire support and tactical coordination, their mathematical precision proving invaluable for calculating safe firing solutions in an environment where space itself was becoming unstable. The turning point came when one of the largest swarm bioships, desperate to escape the quantum cascade, attempted to absorb matter directly from the field to fuel its regeneration. The result was catastrophic. The bioship literally tore itself apart as quantum-entangled matter disrupted every cellular process simultaneously. Admiral, Dr. Yamamoto called out urgently. The quantum cascade is becoming self-sustaining. The swarm's attempts to feed within the field are accelerating the reaction exponentially. Sarah realized they had achieved something unprecedented. They had turned the swarm's greatest strength, their ability to consume and adapt, into a fatal weakness. Every attempt to feed within the quantum field only made the field larger and more dangerous. All ships begin withdrawal to Phase 3 positions, she ordered. We're going to let physics finish this fight for us. As the combined fleet retreated to minimum safe distance, the quantum cascade continued to expand, fed by the swarm's own desperate attempts to survive. Bioships that had seemed invincible hours earlier were now trapped in an ever-expanding field of quantum instability that turned their feeding process into an instrument of self-destruction. The final moments of the battle were almost anticlimactic. The largest swarm bioship, apparently recognizing the hopelessness of the situation, attempted to break free from the quantum field and retreat to FTL. Instead, the quantum entanglement that had poisoned its cellular structure caused a catastrophic failure during the transition to faster-than-light travel. The explosion that followed was visible from 3 star systems away. Threat assessment? Sarah asked, as the sensor operators struggled to process readings from an environment that no longer followed conventional physical laws. No remaining large contacts, came the report. Scattered small organisms detected, but their biosignatures are degrading rapidly. Admiral, I think we got them all. The command bridge erupted in cheers from both human and Zephyrian crew members, but Sarah remained focused on the larger implications of what they had accomplished. Dr. Yamamoto, assessment of the quantum cascade field. It's stabilizing at approximately 30% of the inner system, Dr. Yamamoto reported. The field appears to be permanent. This star system is now effectively quarantined by quantum instability. Admiral Zexhai approached Sarah with an expression of awe and growing concern. Admiral Chun, what we've accomplished here, it's unprecedented. We've destroyed the largest swarm force ever assembled, but we've also rendered an entire star system uninhabitable. Sarah nodded soberly. The price of stopping an unstoppable enemy. The question now is whether we can replicate this success without sacrificing every world we're trying to protect. She activated communications to the entire fleet. All vessels prepared detailed combat reports for immediate transmission to Terra Defense Force and Zephyrian Command. What we've learned here will determine strategy for the remainder of this conflict. As the combined fleet began the process of documenting humanity's first major victory against the Void Swarm, Sarah found herself reflecting on the broader implications of their success. They had proven that the swarm could be defeated, but only by using methods that no other galactic civilization had been willing to contemplate. The galaxy was about to discover why humans were considered the most dangerous species they had ever encountered. And, more importantly, The Void Swarm was about to learn that their reign of terror had finally encountered an enemy that was more willing to accept destruction than defeat. The war was far from over, but the balance of power had fundamentally shifted. For the first time since the Swarm's emergence, the forces of galactic civilization had hope. And hope, as humanity had learned long ago, was the most dangerous weapon of all. The message that reached the farthest edges of human space 3 days later was simple. Corellia Prime engagement successful. Swarm main force destroyed. Quantum cascade tactics proven effective. Preparing for system-wide implementation. Humanity has joined the fight. Across the galaxy, civilizations that had written off the Outer Rim territories suddenly began reconsidering their strategic calculations. The most dangerous species in the galaxy had finally entered the war, and they were fighting it the only way they knew how, with everything they had regardless of cost. The Void Swarm's next move would determine whether the galaxy survived the cure humanity was about to provide.